On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Saarah. And like many of us, Saarah didn't just grow up in a dysfunctional home. She also eventually ended up in a long-term abusive relationship that had her in such a fog that she didn't even recognize her own self anymore. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, a podcast that gives a voice to survivors of narcissistic abuse. I am Brandon Chadwick, but my friends call me Chad, and thanks for tuning into this episode. So what is a narcissist, you may ask? Well, for the purposes of this podcast, we refer to a narcissist as anyone who has displayed a pattern of behavior that shows a limited capacity to appreciate others' perspectives. It is that simple. And now, before we get to our episode with Saarah, I just want to say that it is unfortunate that this show exists in the first place. It really is. But it does. And our audience in the last 2 months has tripled. And we don't expect that to slow down anytime soon. And as we grow, we are going to have growing pains from well-intentioned ideas that fall flat, and I apologize for those, to returning emails in a timely manner, to even having some of those emails get completely lost in the shuffle. You know, we're learning as we go, and we just want to thank everyone for sticking with us and being part of this community, advocating for others on Facebook, in our support group, or in your non-digital lives too. So as we grow, we want to start providing more services for you. Soon we'll be starting a second podcast, which will be more information-based. It will be for mental health professionals to answer your questions or discuss topics surrounding narcissistic and domestic abuse. And we'll also be debuting our directory with these specific professionals, but our directory will come with an additional feature that works a lot like Quora. You'll be able to ask questions to these professionals on the directory, and they'll be the ones that are answering your questions. We want to create these building blocks, and hopefully we'll create this solid foundation, you know, because one day it would be really cool if we could have like a dedicated phone line for everyone to call if you're in crisis, just in case you just need someone to talk to. You know, that's way kind of down the road type of idea, but we're not close there yet, but hopefully, you know, one day we can provide that kind of service. So just kind of bear with us as we go. You know, I've gone on long enough here, but I just want to thank everyone for being part of this community, helping out when you can. A big shout out to Jules. You know, Jules was once a guest on the show and is an administrator on our Facebook support group. She's a wonderful person, and I'm proud that she's my friend. I just want to thank her for all her hard work. You know, she works really hard. She's got a full life, and she's out there, and she's supporting everyone. So big thanks to Jules. Also, the quickest way to be part of the show is if you want to read a letter to your narcissist and be part of our Letters to a Narcissist compilation episode. We've had 2 already. We're doing a 3rd. So we have a voicemail recorder on our website. Just go to narcissistapocalypse.com. It's on the right side of the page. It's always floating around, hard to miss. There's a button that says send voicemail. Press it and away you'll go. We're accumulating these for Letters to My Narcissist Volume 3. And if you have to record more than once, because it only records 5 minutes at a time, twice, 3 times, 4 times, do as many as you need. If you want us to read your letters, me and my old pal Melissa, hey Melissa, send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com. And now, I'm going to get out of my own way. Here is my interview with Saarah, and I'll check back in with you when it is all over. Hello, everyone out there, and welcome to this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse. With me is Saarah. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am pretty good. And you're about to tell us a story of your ex-narcissist. But before we begin, you're going to tell us a story of briefly of your family. And now, without further ado, I'm going to get out of my and your way, and the floor is all yours.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start out with just kind of setting the stage, going a little bit into the background of my family, because it kind of set me up for the whole relationship and everything that happened with my ex-husband. So back on my family, my family's Indian. We're Indian immigrants. We moved here when I'm about 3 or 4, and we moved to the States. And both of my parents growing up just absolutely despised each other. They had an arranged marriage, which they only knew each other for 2 weeks before they got married. They were emotionally and physically abusive with each other, and they still are. And they were my mom was physically and emotionally abusive with the kids, with me, my brother, and my sister. And my dad was more neglectful more than anything else. He is still neglectful. He was never physically abusive to us, but he was to my mom. So I'm not going to go too far into it, but there are a couple of things that really define my mom's interaction with me when growing up. I've talked to a lot of therapists, and a lot of them have, suggested she may have borderline personality disorder, but they're always usually just almost taken aback, and they don't really know what to say when I tell them some of these stories. I always knew when something was off with her, like we all knew, because you could just kind of see it on her face. We would, be having breakfast in the morning, and, I still remember I spilled a cup of milk, on accident. I'm like, 4, I don't really know what I'm doing. I spilled a glass of milk, and that leads to a full blown episode with her where she's, hitting us all and, she's holding my hand above a flame because I spilled a glass of milk. She would do things like that even if I was hungry, and it just set her off. So she just had complete psychotic breaks. And then I went through a lot. I was abused by a relative, a family member. I was molested for years. She knew, and she didn't do anything about it. She would pretend like it didn't really happen. Like at first she would say, "Oh, it did happen." And then every day after that, she would act like I was making it up, like I was crazy and I was lying. And then she would be like, "Well, your childhood was great. I don't know what you're talking about." But then to get back at my dad, she would use the story, and tell family members, to shame him and to make them think that he was terrible because, he was a relative from my dad's side. So she would use it to re-traumatize me, and then to also, traumatize everyone in the family, but to get her way, basically. So I had a lot of issues growing up with her. My dad knew things were going on, like she would beat us, but he was always an enabler. He always kind of let her get away with it, and he never did anything to stop it. And she would leave us for months at a time to go back to India. We were, really little kids, so we were kind of fending for ourselves a lot of that time. So I grew up, I was the oldest female child, so traditionally I was supposed to be like the caretaker, next in line to be the caretaker. So I just had to learn really quickly how to take care of everything. So I think, that's the gist of it. I can go into so much detail about how my mom is a narcissist, but she definitely set the stage for me and for everything that preceded. And I just grew up knowing that, I wasn't allowed to have any feelings, and I grew up blaming myself, because when you're treated like you don't matter, you think, and you're also treated like you're the reason that this person is suffering, because she would always tell us that, like, she can't live her life because she had us kids, and everything she was going through was always our fault. So I blamed everything on myself. I was always walking on eggshells. And, when someone doesn't protect you for some basic things, like they don't give you they don't meet your most basic needs as a child, like protecting you and looking out for you and just loving you, you have a really hard time, like, validating those needs for yourself and realizing that you deserve that. So it just really was the perfect recipe to just really completely screw me up.
Did you also have fear of abandonment issues because your mom was always going away?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it wasn't just the fact that she kept leaving. Like, sometimes she would leave and I would wake up and she would just be gone, because she thought not telling us that she was going was going to help. Obviously it didn't help when we knew either, but it definitely filled me up with that fear of abandonment. Like I remember, like if we were outside at a store and I turned around and I couldn't see her, I would immediately just start crying and sobbing and freaking out because I thought, oh fuck, she like left again. But the abandonment issues also come from, when someone's just not there for you when you really need them, when someone's hurting you, like then you're taught that, yeah, you're just left feeling completely alone and isolated and just completely abandoned. So anyways, I was raised in this setting, in this family. I got old enough to the point where she stopped the physical abuse, but the emotional abuse has always been consistent to this day. And cut to, I'm 22 years old. I'm going to school. I'm going to college. I am taking this English class, and, I love this class. And this is something I realized growing up pretty fast that, English, writing, reading, like this is stuff that makes me feel like myself. And it's one of those things that I have that's just for me. I meet this guy in there. This guy who ends up being my husband. I don't talk to him for like 4 months. I eventually asked him to help me with the paper at the end of the semester. And he's 4 hours late to that first meeting. And, I keep waiting around for him because I already don't, clearly I don't have boundaries, and clearly I don't realize that when someone makes you wait for them for 4 hours, that's not okay. That's not healthy.
But you didn't know that at the time.
I definitely didn't know it at the time. At the time, I was like, oh, he's just busy, and maybe he thinks you're, I'm already making excuses for him. In my head, I'm like, oh, maybe he thinks you're just hanging out and doing your paper, and he doesn't know how long you'll be on campus. So I make up my own excuses. I just tell myself this other story. So because I don't know, I just want to, I'm so set into thinking that this is something that's going to be good, and I just feel like I've already built it up in my head. So he shows up, and I realized later that was already the first boundary probably that he was testing for me. That was probably the first test. Like if this girl waits around for me 4 hours, like in his eyes, I'm already somebody who's probably very passive. So we meet. He doesn't really help me with the paper because I don't really need help. I know I already wrote really well, and it was just an excuse to talk to him. So I go home, and then I go back to campus so I could, finish working on this paper. We end up meeting up at the library again, and all of a sudden he's acting a lot more interested in me. And he starts asking me all these questions about myself, and I am I've always been a little too trusting, and I tend to be an open book. And I realize now I have to be careful about that. But at the time I had no idea that this was like something dangerous. So I tell him a lot of things about me, and he's asking pretty personal questions right off the bat, about my family, we're already talking about how isolated my childhood was. And this was the second time I've, talked to him. And one of the weird things in that conversation was I kept trying to ask him more questions because I wanted to know about him as well. And he's not sharing anything with me. Like, the most detail he shares with me about his family is that his dad likes to drink Diet Coke. It was some really benign detail about his father. But overall, he's like, yeah, my dad, he just says that he has a great family and they're divorced, but everyone's good. And I'm like, okay. So he just doesn't go into that. So we start talking right away. He starts texting me a bunch. I leave, I go home, and he just is texting me while I'm driving on the way home. So he doesn't wait 2 minutes until after I'm already in my car. And he's just, saying like, it was such a good conversation. It was so nice meeting you. I'm really glad, I ended up going to the library and, talk to you again. So I'm already starting to feel really flattered and like he's flirting with me. We set up a date like on Friday or something like that. And we end up talking all night. And he, one of the things he does is he's like, oh, let's just go out, like tomorrow. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, he's like really into me because he wants to see me right away. So, all this stuff is going on, and some of this is not going to be in chronological order, so I apologize. But while we're talking and meeting, we go on a couple dates. He's flattering me, he's love bombing me, just constant compliments all the time. And one of the conversations we have on campus is when I first like, this is the first moment he scares me, I guess. And we're like flirting, he's teasing me, and I'm teasing him back. And I do that, like, the only thing I know to do in terms of flirting is, I guess at the time, I just, like, he joked, he was teasing me, and I giggled, and I was like, oh, shut up. And, I said in a teasing way, I definitely wasn't serious about him shutting up. He just, like, I still remember the posture he sat in. It was directly in front of me. He had his hands together, and he just looked at me, and it looked like his face totally changed. And that immediately probably reminded me, that fear probably came from remembering my mom's mood instantly change, because he just stared at me directly in my eyes and looked like there's nothing there. And very seriously, he was just like, you need to apologize for saying that. And I thought he was joking at first, and I wasn't sure what he was talking about. So I was like, oh, apologize for what? And maybe that's me just being nervous in the moment. And he's like, you need to apologize for saying shut up to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I apologize. I just instantly said sorry because I was just scared. And I didn't really know what just happened, but I definitely felt really ashamed because I felt like I had just done something wrong, and I just disappointed the first person who's ever shown any interest in me in my life at that point in time. So I instantly apologized.
Sorry about that. So once this happened, and there was, I guess, an anger from the other side in the sense of, maybe, did you feel like it was authoritative in any way?
It definitely felt that way. Like,
you conformed immediately to that tone, that look, and it wasn't even something you thought about because to you that was just a natural thing to do.
Exactly. Like, instantly, it's like, yeah, it just felt animalistic. That reaction was just, something in my body knew I just had to protect myself. So I thought, okay, I just have to apologize because this is scaring me right now. The first part of the relationship was great. I mean, he's definitely making me feel, aside from that moment, obviously there's definitely little red flags here and there. He's still love bombing me all the time. He's giving me, jewelry, but more importantly, he's just telling me how much he's talking about me to all his friends, and he's already bragging about me to them, and he's telling them how cool I am and how interesting I am. And, so I feel like he's put me up on this pedestal, and I definitely start to feel very seen and like he really cares about me. He, calls me on really, like this was sometime in December actually, so this month, which is crazy. So he goes on vacation with his family to London, and he's calling me on and it's around December, so he calls me on Christmas and he calls me on New Year's Eve, and we had just started hanging out with each other, and it's still very new. And so the fact that he's making it a point to call me on these important dates, because I didn't expect him to do that, but he made it a point to. And of course, if someone's calling you from overseas, it's kind of a big deal, especially when you're not that close to them yet. So, he's just doing a lot of things to make me feel incredibly special and important. He's taking time out of his family vacation to make me a priority. And he's talking about us like we're already a team. He's saying he's never met anyone like me before. We have a few interesting moments while he's on vacation. One of the times that he calls me, or one of the times that we're talking, we're talking about music, and we're talking about all our interests, and we're sharing our favorite songs. And so in my head, I'm thinking, okay, he's telling me his favorite song, and I was thinking about what my favorite song is, and I'm going to tell him. And before I can even say what my favorite song is, I think I maybe start out describing the song, and then he's like, oh, it's Avril 14th by Aphex Twin. And in my head, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, how did he know what song I was thinking? Like, so it kind of weirded me out, but in a good way, which I think now, knowing what I know now, that would creep me out and not be a good feeling. But, in that moment, I was 22. I'm naive. I don't really, I have nothing to measure this up against, except I think this is a great guy. So I get it in my head that he, maybe he knows this for a reason. And maybe, we're supposed to be talking for a reason, because this song was just something that was super important to me. I had been listening to it since I was 14 or 15 years old. When I started writing around that age, and I would write a lot to that song. So it was just a really weird coincidence.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? I listened to that song because, we had our pre-call and everything. For everyone out there who doesn't know the song, there are no words to it. This is, how many downloads it had on or views it had on YouTube. Not that many. This is very obscure song for two people.
Yeah.
To have as their best song. And I think when I listen to the other Aphex Twin songs, they don't have any words.
They don't, and they're kind of weird.
So this is very rare for two people to say that this is their favorite song.
Yeah.
Either the biggest coincidence in the world.
Yeah. Or
someone already knew that this was your favorite song.
Right. And so, like I said, I listened to it all the time. So, it was 4 months where we had class together. Maybe he heard me talking about the song to someone. Maybe he heard me listening to it. I don't know. But it's really weird, and it is really obscure. And I remember talking to him about it, and I would say how much the song means to me. And his response to that was, yeah, I played that song for my friends once, and they just didn't get it, but I feel like you get it. And in my head at the time, I was like, oh my God, he totally gets it. And so
of course you would. Of course you would.
Right.
Like when I went to go listen to that song, I thought I was about to hear the catchiest song in the world, like an indie college song. And then I'm not saying any offense to your taste in music, but I was just like that was interesting. To think that two people had that specific, because obviously all of their songs have no words and are in that, was it melancholy, or I don't know if that would be the proper term, but it was, you could have picked any of their songs in their catalog. And so I just thought it was like, that could be way more than a coincidence.
Exactly. Yeah. It's weird. So that moment planted a seed in my head for the whole relationship. Because I kept telling myself, well, Saarah, that's a really big coincidence. Like, that must mean something. And I would say that in my head every time I started having doubts in the relationship. And it makes no sense. It's such an irrational thing to tell yourself when someone's treating you like shit. Like, why would you stay with that person just because of a coincidence like that? But it was just a weird seed that was planted, and just an excuse I attached myself to stay with him. And then the other thing was, I shared with him, books and stuff. And at the time, it was easier for me to describe myself through, songs or lyrics or books, because I probably had a very hard time, identifying who I was at that time. So I would be like, yeah, like, have you read this story, or that story really means a lot to me? And so I told him about this my favorite book, Winesburg, Ohio, and how I read it when I was 15, and that's why I started writing, and how it changed my life, and it did, and I stick by that still. It was super impactful for me, and it really helped me cope with a lot of really bad stuff going on in my life. And I told him about a specific story in that book, and the story is interesting. It's kind of about this girl, and it's about how this guy is telling her how it's harder to be loved and to allow yourself to be loved than to love others. And I remember reading that my whole life, and up until that point, thinking like that really, it made sense to me. And I told him about that, and at first when I told him to read the story, he read it, and he was kind of upset. He got kind of angry with me, and almost like he interpreted me asking him to read that story as me saying I was too afraid to be with him or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was that he said, but it was something along those lines. And it was a really weird reaction, I thought, because I thought I was just sharing something interesting with him about myself. I didn't think it was going to be like threatening at all, because it's just a story. So we didn't talk for a couple of days. He just, again, went from all over me to, I'm not talking to you anymore. And I thought something really wrong had happened. And then he calls me again, and he's like, oh, I read that story again, and I think I understand it better now. And he acted like the story tells me so much about you. And he acted like he understood it finally. And I didn't realize at the time that he was probably taking the most meaningful thing I ever had in my life up until that point, something that mattered so much to me. And he he was probably using it to manipulate me. He probably read that story and saw some vulnerabilities I had and just kind of used it to find more weaknesses in me. But anyways, I don't see any of that at this. I still think that this is going great and whatever. So yeah, the first 2 months, he's established trust. I'm fully in. I, totally look up to him. I think he's so smart, and I see us as a team. He's like, he's finally like, we're official now, and I'm like, okay, cool. And I didn't realize he just kind of decided when we were official, and I just went along with it, even though I, wasn't seeing anyone else at the time. And he's really good at. We had a lot of similar interests and a lot of things that we hated. So he was just very good at mirroring my things I liked and things I didn't like. So again, I'm still thinking like how did I find somebody who's so much like me, who understands me so much? But in the second month or so, the second or third month, things really start going downhill. He started picking at a lot of my interest, and he would say a lot of disparaging things about, he started saying disparaging things about my looks. Like at first he would start picking on things like I was eating, and he would say like, oh, that's really unhealthy. Are you sure you want to eat that? And in my head, I was thinking like, he knows I struggled with eating disorders growing up. So why is he saying that? And again, I'm making excuses for him in my head. I'm thinking, oh, he means well, maybe, you're just being too sensitive right now. And so he's always gotten a wandering eye, and he's always saying, oh, this person's really pretty, or that person's beautiful. And just to the point where I was like, uncomfortable about it. So anyway, he's finding all kinds of ways to degrade me, on my appearance. The controlling part, starts coming through pretty quickly. He does not like it when I'm on my phone. He always thinks I'm talking to a guy. At one point, he asked me to show him all my contacts. So he goes through all my contacts, and if there's any males, he asked me to remove any males from my phone. And then he's like, why do you have so many guys' phone numbers? And I just, these are just numbers I've had over time. I don't even know who half these people are. And, I have no investment in it. And I definitely didn't want to take the time to delete every number. But of course, to, make him feel better, I did. And he would say weird things like, it wasn't directly like, you're not allowed to talk to them, as much as it was like, well, Saarah, it's like your choice to continue talking to them, but that if you do something like that, I don't know if I can be with someone who does that. So it was always like this implication of an ultimatum where if you choose to do this, I will,
It was a very subtle ultimatum in a sense. It's very odd. I was just watching The Matrix before we came on here, and The Matrix is a lot about choice, where it's all part of the movie is the thought process of it's the illusion of choice, and he's giving you the illusion of choice, where in reality you actually do not have one. Exactly.
Exactly, because I'm cornered into thinking that this is the only option if I want to keep him around, basically. So he does a lot of that. So I stopped talking to boys altogether, because I think, I'm being treated as if I'm doing something bad if I do that. So I don't have any guy friends. So it's kind of like he's also isolating me at that point in time. So he starts undercutting the most important thing to me at the time, which was writing. He starts getting really insecure about that. I got a lot of attention for writing from my teachers, and I had this little journal at the time, this little online journal that some people would read, and people would encourage me about it and compliment me about it. And he stopped complimenting me about it pretty quick, because I think he realized I was already getting feedback from other people that was positive, and it just made him feel insecure. But he had this habit of turning all my good things into bad things. So the writing was this big opportunity for me to get this internship when I was with him at the time. And it was through the same professor he had a couple years ago. He tells me that he's like, I feel a little competitive with you about the internship thing, because something like that was an offer to him. So I've already realize that this is making him insecure. And of course I don't go through with it. And again, he's really working at turning things I care about, things that make me who I am, things that are good. And he's turning them into something that they're no longer good, and they're hurting him in some ways. So I start, losing pieces of my identity and things that are important to me, things that make me happy.
So the term that we discussed before you came on the show was, you called it inverting. Was it inverting negatives?
It was inverting positives.
Inverting positives. Sorry.
Yeah.
Inverting positives. So what he's doing here is taking a positive thing for you, especially from when you were growing up, something that you actually had, that was yours, that you were proud of, that you were good at. And it was something really big for you, very big. And now he's making you think negatively of this thing that you love, which is now going to start taking joy out of a lot of your life in that sense, I assume, because this is something that has really gotten you through to this point of your life.
Yeah. This was writing was how I found my voice. Writing, it wasn't through anything else. Writing, I started when I was like 14 or 15. That is when I found my voice. That's when I found a way to talk about my childhood, what I went through, what I was feeling, what I was thinking, because there was no other sounding board for that in my life. And writing was that thing for me. So it saved a lot of who I am. And it helped me figure out who I was in a lot of ways. So, and he knew how vital it was. I told him everything, and I shared a lot of the writing with him. So he knew a lot of very intimate details about me more than anyone else. So he knew exactly what he was doing, and that's, what they do is they take something that probably grounds you and they try to remove that from beneath you so that you're destabilized.
And just so everyone knows, a lot of this has happened right now in a very short amount of time. And you've been undermined with a lot of comments, and like those are a lot of devaluing you comment wise and nitpicking. He's done the X's being crazy type of stuff going on. The control stuff that he's been implementing over this period of time is an immense amount that has been going on. And now this taking your positives away from you. And just also for everyone out there, this is a short amount of time, but your relationship did last for 6 years. Correct. So, this is just kind of the beginning of everything. And this went on for a very long time. And I guess we'll eventually get into the point where we'll explain that he was also in the military.
Yeah. So this is all the very beginning of the relationship. And a few months in, he tells me that he's in the Navy and he's in the reserves, and he tells me he gets called up for deployment. So the deployment is supposed to start at the 6-month mark in our relationship. And I find out later that he didn't get called up. He signed up for it. But when he's telling me the story about how, I'm getting called up to go overseas, he gets emotional and cries in front of me, which now that I think about is really funny, because that means that he totally faked crying in front of me. And, he's talking about it like it's this really emotional thing for him, and that he doesn't want to go because what we have it's starting out to be so good. He doesn't want to mess things up so early. And this is his second deployment, and the first deployment he went on, he references how that, really ruined his other relationship and how he doesn't want that to happen to us. So, I'm like, I've not been together with him for that long, but I'm already, pretty, head over heels in love with him. And I'm thinking, of course, I'm going to be there for him when he goes overseas. Like, he didn't ask for this to happen. And, I'll totally be there for him. So like 100% loyalty at this point for me. So his first deployment is at the 6-month mark of our relationship. He is gone for he's almost gone for a year. Almost a year is like 10 to 11 months. And then he's back home for about a year, and then he's deployed again. And before he's deployed the second time is when we get married. So there's this is some stuff that probably won't be in chronological order. There's this girl he talks about from his philosophy class that he's taking, and he spends weeks telling me how much he hates her. And he calls her really bad names, and he's like, I just hate her. she's so cold and she thinks she's so much better than everyone. And sometimes when you hear somebody talk about how much they hate someone, you're like, I wonder if they're overcompensating for something. The next thing I know, I'm in his car and he's listening to a mix CD and he's like, I was like, oh, this is good. What is this? And he's like, oh, this is from that girl from my class. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the one you say you hate, she gave you a mix CD? And then all of a sudden they're hanging out all the time and going to bars and drinking, and it's always without me. And he comes home late. And one night I joined them. And at the bar, she's teasing him about how he's always on his phone. And so I was thinking, oh, okay, teasing's okay right now. So I can join in and poke fun at him because that's what we're doing. So I say something about how, like, yeah, first thing he does in the morning is get on his phone. And that's all I say. And that leads to a full out fight in the middle of the bar in front of her where he's yelling at me. And I feel like I'm arguing with a lawyer, like he's interrogating me and asking me what proof I have that he's addicted to his phone and all this other stuff. And I just start crying, and she gets up to go to the bathroom, and I just leave. And that ended up with him not, I texted him when I got back to my apartment. He didn't answer his phone for hours. And that ended up with me forgiving him at 1:30 in the morning, where he's like, yeah, I was hanging out with her and I just brought my phone in the car, and I'm really sorry. And he said some drawn out apology about his insecurities and all this other stuff. And I believed everything he said. And, so he's also, throughout all this time, he's just realizing how many boundaries he can push of mine and how much I'm tolerating. And it just keeps getting worse and worse from here on.
When you were sitting at that table, mm-hmm. Did you feel that you were the third wheel in their relationship?
Absolutely. And it's funny that you say that, because I felt like the third wheel all the time with him. I always felt like the way I said it was, I always felt like I was a supporting actress in his film. And I was just there to make him look good. And yeah, always third wheeling. And it was always about them and whoever he was talking to, but especially if it was a female, particularly in those situations. So yeah,
And one last thing, because I'm sorry for interrupting. It was just that when you said before the part about, when he doesn't, sorry, what am I saying? When you said the part about when he is, saying that he doesn't like someone, it just, for me, my memory goes boom right back to mine. And that was their MO. Whenever they said they didn't like something, that was their sleight of hand trick. It was like, you're not going to look at this person now because I've already stated for so long how much I have disdain for them. So why would that person be a threat? Right. But in reality, they were the threat. They just made you look over there immediately by saying it.
Exactly. Yeah, because every time I brought it up, the line was always, how much I didn't like her. It was always like, you're crazy. Why would you think that, Saarah? So there was nowhere for me to go from there. That was basically him telling me, like, you shouldn't believe what you're thinking and feeling because it's not true, So already being conditioned to think that. And so there were several girls throughout the relationship. And I do remember that night. It was not that night, but maybe the following day, he gave me a whole lecture on how I'm codependent. And again, that authoritative thing, like he's lecturing me and as if I don't know what the fuck is going on or anything. And then he gives me a book on codependency that I read. And then I believe that I'm the problem. He's treating me now that like he apologized, but then he went from that to actually you're the problem. And I believed that for the majority of the relationship, that I was the problem.
At what age does he give you that book on codependency?
I was probably still 22 years old.
And he's around the same age?
No, he was older than me. He was about 5 years older than me.
Okay.
Or 6? 5 or 6 years older than me, yeah.
That's it's a pretty advanced type of tactic or move. I would say, like at 22, does a 22-year-old even know what codependency is?
I didn't.
Yeah, and at 27, I didn't know what codependency was. So, right. He was really doing his work.
He was. And like, that's the thing. Like, he was smart, but any intelligence he had, he perfected his manipulation with that intelligence. And yeah, I didn't know what codependency was until I did read that book. And I had only been in therapy by that point in time for like 6 months or less. And it was with a therapist I wasn't really getting anything out of anyway. So I really had no idea internally what was going on. So another aspect of him was another way that he manipulated this whole situation was and I know narcissists tend to be really charming people. He was the epitome of charm, and he was so personable, and all of his friends just like when he was around, he was definitely the center of attention. He was a storyteller. He had all the good stories. He was also the comedian, and he was just, revered for his intelligence. And, his friends have no clue what's going on behind doors. And I'm quickly realizing that this person I'm spending all this time with is so different when we're out in public. And I think I'm crazy because I don't understand how somebody can go from being such a terrible human being to being such a good human being.
When you were out in public and you knew the behind the doors persona and you're watching him being so charismatic with friends and strangers and everything, are you watching it from your own body, or are you kind of watching it from behind you, watching it go on, if that makes sense?
That does make sense. I definitely didn't feel like I was in my body. That's funny that you put it that way, but it definitely didn't feel like it was one of those moments where I felt like my head was kind of floating, and I was just I felt really blank and almost am I hearing this right? Is this really happening? But and so a part of me, when you witness something like that, maybe a healthy person would be like, hey, what's that about? But I remember being too afraid to bring that up because he was also, I realized quickly how insecure and fragile he seemed, and how insecure he was about any criticism. So I knew that if I did bring this up to him and accused him essentially of pretending to be something he wasn't, it would be a full-blown meltdown. And I knew that would probably be the end of the relationship. So I just never brought it up. I just chose to ignore it. And at the same time, he's doing all this, his friends think he's great, but he's also he's telling them a lot of stories about our fights, personal details about our fights that make me out to be I'm irrational and crazy, and make it out to be he's just very patient and,
so
very patient.
He's proactively discrediting you to them to make you look incompetent.
Yeah, to make me look incompetent, overly emotional, hysterical, everything. He had a habit. He thought it was funny to tell the stories from his perspective when, in fact, it was just extremely degrading and just made me feel really, really invalidated and really stupid. So anyways, it's a whirlwind. It's like this for some time. Eventually he told me I need to go into counseling again. And I was doing counseling on and off at the time. So I go back into counseling. He tells me I need to see a counselor. So, of course, not him, just me. So I go into counseling, and then my counselor is like, maybe you should do couples therapy. So I suggest that to him. We end up seeing a few couples therapists for a couple years, on and off. And we see maybe 3 or 4, I think. And he is really good. This whole experience was really terrible for me because I put a lot of trust in my therapist, and each therapist just loved him, So, and a lot of that time I couldn't bring up, he told me I wasn't supposed to bring up certain things in our relationship because he was not ready to talk about it and he was too embarrassed. So I didn't bring up a lot of stuff.
So when the therapists are validating him over you, at that point, do you think officially that you have gone crazy?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It wasn't until I started seeing a new therapist. She was the first one who started making me feel less crazy because she, probably caught on to some details I shared and realized that there was a lot more going on beneath the surface than I was letting on. And what was not very smart is I felt threatened by that because she started challenging me about it, and I stopped seeing her. So fast forward, this is just, I'm just really miserable. I had just gotten to the point where I felt so uncomfortable and unwanted and unsafe that just being around him just made my blood curdle. It just made me really unhappy. So another incident that happened towards the very end that, of course, totally deflated any possible chance of this working out was I went to a pharmacy and I had a card that has money on it, and I use it to get, whatever medications I need. And what's funny is I was supposed to go to the pharmacy to get, it's not funny, I guess, but it is a little funny now. But I was going back to the pharmacy because I needed to get Xanax because I was getting Xanax because my doctor was like, wow, you're going through a lot in your marriage. Like, I think you need some Xanax. So I was going to get Xanax for myself because of him. I couldn't afford the Xanax, and I didn't know why, because I know I had enough money in there. And I make a bunch of phone calls. I call the pharmacy, and I go back and I call the insurance company and everything. They said somebody had spent $250 from my card. And I was like, I have no medications that cost $250. But we did share this card, but nothing we had cost that much money. And at this point in time, we had not been sleeping together for 9 months about, and we just almost never slept together for a majority of that relationship. So when I go to the counter, they are like, so you're, somebody who had your card, your husband came in here and he purchased Cialis, and Cialis is kind of like Viagra. And I was really surprised because, of course, we're not doing anything. But all the signs are there, right? Like, I call him and I can't hold back at this point. I'm way too pissed off. So I'm like, what is going on? Like, you purchased Cialis and you didn't tell me. I have no money in my account. He's like, I can't talk to you right now. I can't talk to you when you're like this. You're being irrational, and I told you I don't like it when you get like this. And so I'm like, okay. He hangs up on me, and then I'm like, screw this. So I start texting him, and I'm like, you need to explain what just happened. What's going on? And I'm like, where is the pill bottle? I'm going to find it. I need to count how many pills are in there, because if one's missing, even if one isn't missing, it doesn't matter, because he did it. He's already, not being faithful, and he won't tell me where the pill bottle is. So, and, to this day, I was never able to count how many pills were in the bottle, and that's fine. But it really bothered me in that moment, because I feel like I kept wanting more and more proof of what he was really doing. And so he knew that, and he knew it was driving me crazy that he wasn't telling me where the pill bottle was. Like, he knew he could hold that over my head. If that's the last vindictive thing he did.
It really didn't matter. I mean, you guys weren't sexually active at the time, and he just got Cialis. So
yeah, exactly.
He was doing a nice railroad job of deflection and reversing it back onto you to make it that you were crazy, and he did a very good job of it.
He did. He was really, really good at it. And it's kind of mind-blowing. You have no idea what's happened to you until you're out of that situation. But yeah, he was really, really good at twisting everything around to make it seem like, nothing I thought was happening was actually happening. So I didn't think I was living in reality. I just was really confused all the time.
You were getting gaslit, and you had the fog. At this point, is the fog lifting?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was definitely, yeah.
And for those that don't understand the fog, it's fear, obligation, and guilt. And that's just the terminology if you're new to narcissism and narcissistic abuse. So at this point in your relationship, you've been confused, and now that confusion is slowly dissipating, and you're starting to see these things for what they are.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when I do finally leave, I was really proud of myself at the moment. Like, I was definitely devastated, but I was also surprised that I left. And he messages me, I think a couple days later, and he's like, so I think we should try we should just do one more couples therapy session. He was like, just to make for absolute sure that like there's no hope left. And my sister is like, don't do it. But of course I do, because I don't want to be the bad guy that he pinked. I don't want him to be like, well, she didn't even try to go couples counseling for the last, I didn't want him to paint it out to be like I gave up too easily or something. So I give in, and we go to couples therapy like for 3 weeks, like once a week. And that whole span of time, he doesn't talk to me outside of couples therapy. While we are in couples therapy, I'm not really sure what we're talking about while we're there. He doesn't even say very much. And I'm like, what's even happening here? Like, there's obviously no hope left. And at that third session, I just call him a coward, and I could tell how angry it made him, because I've just had it. And I realize now that it's, he was dragging this whole process along because, one, to just hurt me. But also because he didn't like that I left. That in his world gave me a power that he did not want me to have. And he also wanted to drag this along because my brother worked at the VA at the time, and he was getting some paperwork processed for disability for an injury he had on his hand. And at one point during one of our arguments, he was like, he got paranoid that my brother, if I told my brother what was going on, then my brother would somehow put a stop to this paperwork going through, and then he would never get the disability income that he was trying to get. So I didn't realize this till later, but I'm pretty sure he was waiting for that paperwork to be finalized before finally telling me, oh yeah, I hired a divorce lawyer and we're done now. And like, that's all it was. So it ends there. Kind of. I end up feeling really like that first drive home from going away from him for that final time. I was crying. I was like, what just happened? Is this real? Is my life is like totally been turned upside down? Like, you just left this person you thought it was your new family, was this new beginning for you. And you realize that you've lost it all. So it's this crazy, I just feel like I have no idea where I'm going. I don't know what's going to happen next. And the next feeling almost immediately after that was relief. Like, I was definitely sad and I was definitely traumatized, but I felt so much relief because I didn't have to be around this person anymore. And I'm starting to realize like how miserable he made me.
You can
how
breathe.
terrible he
you
was.
Can breathe. You can
Exactly.
breathe for the first time. To quote Kelly Clarkson.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
She gets it. Yeah. So this is the first time I've actually ever been on my own in my life and safe. Not living with an abusive person, away from my mom, away from my ex, and kind of able to start that healing process again. I've spent the last 4 years, I've been single. I haven't dated a soul. I've spent 3 years not feeling attracted to another human being. Like, the idea of being with someone was really repulsive to me. But
you just needed a hard reset.
I did. I didn't just spend 4 years, being miserable. I spent 4 years like learning about myself again. And
so what have you learned about yourself?
A lot, like a lot. And I think that a lot of that has been just this last year because I've finally been able to have my own place and be on my own without having to worry, constantly look over my shoulder at what the next person's going to do to hurt me. I've been working on kind of like finding my voice again. Cause I think that first 3 years where I was still trying to like survive, it was a really big distraction from dealing with everything I had dealt with, and not only in my childhood, but also with my ex. So I've started writing again. Writing is one of those things that I've always been really, really scared about picking up again because I I just feel like I'm going to fail at it. I feel like I'm just going to lose it again, and it's just going to disappear. And that was such a big part of my identity that I feel like for a long time, I didn't know who I was without the writing. And one of the ways I look at it, I guess, is, one of the reasons I wear it like a badge of honor is because I see a lot of other people who kind of get into one relationship after another, and they don't really seem to be okay with being alone, and they seem really uncomfortable about kind of processing things that they're going through. And I know that my brother, for example, really struggled with that. Like, he went the other direction. He went and adopted traits from my parents, and he didn't really escape that pattern. But I knew that I needed to kind of get out of that cycle and be alone for a while, and, you know, kind of confront these demons that had been chasing me. And I'm really sorry. Can I stop for a second? Because I can feel myself panicking right now. Which I'm surprised is happening. I think I'm just getting a little emotional, and yeah, sorry. I just need a second. Okay. Sorry.
Don't apologize. Not needed.
I don't know. I think I just panicked and I just totally lost track of what I was saying.
No, we were talking about your healing and, you know, being alone and not minding being alone and it being a badge of honor for you.
And I think a lot of people on the outside, sometimes maybe they don't get it. That's where I feel the pressure from, you know, like family, or, you know, maybe some people don't always understand why, or maybe don't understand that you do like being alone. Because while, like, the last year especially, I realized that when I left my ex, I've always been very in touch with my emotions. I've always been very, you know, when I feel things really strongly. Like, if I feel happy, I feel really happy. If I feel really sad, I feel really sad. And for like 3 years, I think I didn't feel hardly anything. And I didn't understand what was going on with me. I was, you know, I was used to using my emotions to write, and I was used to experiencing the world through how I felt. And I felt like I just wasn't really alive for a long time. I kind of felt like a zombie, and I was just going through the motions every day. And I started thinking about that a lot. And I realized that, you know, when you're not only like in my childhood, but when you're in a relationship, when you're with anyone who is constantly attacking you, to protect the things that matter most to you, you know, the most precious parts of yourself, you armor that up to protect it. And I think over the years, especially with my ex, I had armored it up to the point where I had no idea how to unlock it again. And I really thought for a while there, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to feel again. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fall in love again. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to, like, allow someone in my life like that to, you know, be with me in that way. Like, I don't even know if I'm capable of this stuff anymore. I totally kind of resigned myself to believing that I'm supposed to be alone. And growing up, I also, for the majority of my life, told myself I was bad luck. Sometimes I just kind of told myself I was kind of doomed to experience, you know, not great things. So I kind of started believing that after a while. It wasn't until I got here, I spent a few months alone, and the feelings started creeping back in. Like, it would be the most random moments. I'd be watching a movie or listening to a song, and out of nowhere, I'd get a flashback, or I'd get a memory, or I'd get like this random thought that I was like, I need to write about this. And it's been a challenge, because there's definitely, like, when I feel myself opening up, it's almost physically, I can feel my body tensing up too at the same time. Like, I'm still physically and emotionally trying to figure out, is it safe to unlock those parts of myself yet and expose that? But I can definitely say, after a year of being here and after a year of working on that healing process and putting in that effort and going to therapy and being willing enough to trust friends again, at least. That part is still very much alive and it's still there. And I really hope it comes back. I know it's not going to come back the same way again. Like I'm definitely different. I've learned how to have boundaries. I've learned to be less trusting of people. And I don't see that as a bad thing. I think that those parts of me are just things I have to be a lot more protective about, because I think the world tends to teach people who are vulnerable that that's a weakness. Especially abusers, they tend to teach you that those things that are really special about you are actually weaknesses. So those aren't good. And you shouldn't let those parts be seen. And I think that you just have to be really careful about who you give those parts to. And it's not the same thing as locking it away. It's just about being more careful, and that treating yourself, with more love and compassion means having better boundaries and being more careful about who you share yourself with. And finding my voice has definitely been terrifying. I think that's why this, having this experience with you I didn't expect it to be this intense for me. And I think the reason it's kind of scary, and I'm glad I'm taking the leap because I want to and I need to, but because I don't know what it's like to really have my own voice. But I'm realizing that it's mine and it belongs to me, and I'm going to take it back. It's different when you're empowering yourself. It's a whole different journey. That's something that I know that can never be taken away by anyone.
When you listen to this episode next week when it comes out, you're going to hear yourself say those words, and you're going to feel like I'm feeling right now, because I feel fantastic for you. I feel amazing. Listening to you say that, it was very powerful to have it come out of your mouth. And when you hear it yourself out of your own mouth, because everyone who I've spoken to who's listened to themselves after they've listened to themselves, it's a big step to hear it. And I have a feeling next week when I talk to you, you're going to change a little, and it's going to be a real positive change once you hear it.
I hope so. I definitely think this is a step in the right direction. Like, I think, I keep talking about the last 4 years, like they were, I kind of felt like I was dead inside or whatever. And so I felt like I was definitely surviving for 3 years of it, because I was just trying to get out of one abusive situation after another. And this last year was when, I really saw the changes happening, because I was safe for the first time in my life, which is kind of crazy to think about that now, because I'm 32 now, and that means I've only spent 1 year of that being safe. So there's a lot more ahead of me. But I always kind of see the last few years, like, I don't know if anyone's seen Stranger Things, but they have like that, the upside down or whatever it's called. And it's like it's a different like dimension, but it's like the inverse of the real world. And that's where all of like your worst nightmares exist, right? That's where there's like nothing good can creep there. There's no light there. And it's just stuck in limbo. And that's where I feel like I had been for a really long time, like just living in this nightmare, and I've been trying to find a way out. And I think at first I was afraid to find my way out, because I know that if I wanted to, I was going to encounter scary things. I was going to encounter monsters and things that were probably really, really terrifying. And I don't know if you've ever like woken up in the middle of the night and you've had a really, really bad nightmare and you're too terrified to move or open your eyes, but you have to. And the moment you do, you're like, oh, okay, it's not that bad. It's nothing there. It's like, I kind of compare it to that in a way. Like, even if there is a monster there, it's like, you just got to like look under your bed and look at it. And most of the time there's nothing there. There's definitely not something as scary as you think it's going to be. And once I started opening my eyes a little bit and making that journey out of that really dark place, I started seeing like, okay, there's this dim light there, and I just got to make it to that light, because in a way, I have to rescue myself and I have to save myself, and no one's going to do that for me. And when you recognize that you have to save yourself, when you recognize that you're rescuing yourself, for some reason, something switches and you realize that clearly, if you want to save yourself, there's something worth saving. And if you want to save yourself, that means you see there's worth inside of you. And I mean, I would never, I hate to say this, like I really despise my ex, and I really hate everything he put me through, but I feel like the strongest person I've ever been in my whole life. And I like surprise myself every day. Like I wake up in Oregon. It's a place I never thought I'd ever be. I live in my own apartment. I have, 2 pets. I have great, friends here. And I'm on my own. I did all that on my own. And I can say that. And I can say that no one helped me get here, and I did it for myself, and I did it myself. And there's just nothing that beats that. There's just no achievement in my life that beats that. So that I thank him for. I definitely thank him for that.
And you should be very proud of yourself. I mean, you had an incredibly difficult upbringing. You had all of these patterns of survival your whole entire life where you lost your identity of who you were. And now you're finally taking your power back and becoming the person you were always meant to be.
Yeah, that's definitely what it feels like. And it's kind of exciting.
So before we end our show, do you have any last words for everyone out there?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think like one of the things I never trusted when I was with my ex was I always wondered why I didn't feel loved when I was with him. And he would always tell me it's because you're insecure. It's because you're this, because you're that. And I spent a lot of time wondering what was wrong with me. Why didn't I feel loved? And I think it's really important to trust yourself. If you're not feeling loved with the person you're with, there's a reason, and to trust your gut about that. You're always smarter and so much stronger than you realize that you're capable, than you think you are. I did not think I was like, I didn't leave him for such a long time because I didn't think I could. I didn't think I had the strength to. I didn't know what my life held after that. And it wasn't until after I left him that I realized just how strong I really was. Yeah, so I would say definitely trust your gut. And if you don't feel loved by the person you're with, there's a reason for that. You should be able to feel loved, and you should feel like you deserve it. And if you don't, then you should, trust yourself. There's a reason your body and your mind is telling you that.
Well, Saarah, thank you for sharing your story with me. It was an honor that you shared this with me.
Thank you.
This evening.
I appreciate it. I'm like sweating a lot right now.
I got to bring up, I never thought I'd bring up Kelly Clarkson in an episode. We discussed American Psycho. I never thought that was, well, I had a feeling maybe that would happen. Patrick Bateman. Stranger Things. I think it might have been the second time I've discussed Stranger Things. I've always, you brought the film nerd out of me and the pop culture nerd out of me.
That's I just feel like those are great. Those I don't know, good metaphors for some of the things.
You were great with your metaphors. You were great with your words and the visuals that you were displaying for everyone. And I really think you're going to help a lot of people with this episode. And you really communicated your feelings very well, and you were very articulate while doing it. So I really want to thank you, not just for myself for being on the show, but for everyone out there who's going to learn a lot from your story. So I guess that's it. That's our show.
Yeah. Awesome. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. And I just wanted to make sure to tell you also, I know that a lot of the people who come on your show, we do just a hell of a lot of work to get to where we are, right? Every survivor does. You have to for yourself. But I definitely wanted to make it a point to tell you that for a lot of us to have the platform to hear other stories like this, it's like you're the vessel that's carrying our stories through this journey. Your podcast does that. It's the platform for all of that. And if I didn't have that as one of my avenues, I'm not sure how else I would have been able to kind of navigate through this part of my life. So it just came at just the right time, which is crazy, but it's the impact that this has created is just it's created a lot of change for a lot of good. And it has been a while since I've been able to come to terms with this, or to start to come to terms with this. And yeah, I just really hope you understand like how many lives are really being changed by you allowing this platform, and you supporting people who come on your show, and you being willing to listen to people's stories, and just it makes a huge difference.
Well, thank you. And I know it doesn't sound like a genuine thank you, but I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And to everyone out there who shares their experience with me and sends me all of your personal notes and experiences in life, I really want to thank you for, being part of my life. I will just hope that I do the best job to give you guys, the respect and time and that you guys all deserve and earned. And so just thank you very much. And, on behalf of myself and Saarah, I hope everyone else out there has a great night.